All right. Good morning, good afternoon, or whenever it is you've decided to click on this video. But welcome into the HoosierIllustrated.com Indiana football postgame wrap-up show. As Kurt Signetti said at the beginning of his press conference last night, all good things come to an end, right? And it's funny thing, I was going to use that phrasing before I had even seen that's or heard that's what he had said in his press conference, and it's just very fitting because historic season, 11-2, go to the college football playoff, and you come up short against Notre Dame, 27-17. And if we're being honest, that score is a lot closer than the game actually was. I guess we can just start from the beginning. Indiana punts on their first drive, but they follow that up on defense with a big momentum shifting interception on what I believe I thought it was. It's saying here it was 2 plays, but for some reason I thought it was the opening drive or the opening play for Notre Dame. But either way, Riley Leonard gets picked off by Indiana in the early going, and Curtis Rourke and company begin kind of marching down the field a little bit. It doesn't take too long, though, for Curtis Rourke to throw his own interception, and that stole away any sort of momentum that Indiana had initially taken from Notre Dame, because it really looked like, especially after that Elijah Surratt catch that was unbelievable, it looked like Indiana was going to have a good shot at getting in the end zone. And unfortunately, that did not end up happening. As I mentioned, Rourke throws his own pick. And from there until the end of the second half, we didn't get a whole lot offensively from Indiana. Credit to Notre Dame for, doing what they needed to do, getting pressure on Curtis Rourke, forcing him to make bad throws, take some sacks. We kind of saw a lot of similarities, a lot of similar issues, I should say, from Indiana when it comes to, if we're comparing what happened against Ohio State. Now, granted, I do think Indiana was decently more competitive against Notre Dame than they were against Ohio State. There were less detrimental things that Indiana did to themselves in this game compared to what happened against Ohio State. Notre Dame just took advantage. They outclassed Indiana. And if you watched In Touch with Indiana Sports this past, I guess it was yesterday morning or afternoon, whenever you would have chosen to listen to it, maybe you didn't listen to it. I was talking with Mitchell Page about the potential outcomes for Indiana and Notre Dame in this game. And I will say this, people will say, and probably on the Notre Dame side, that Indiana got blown out. That's not what this was. But Indiana did absolutely get outclassed against Notre Dame from nearly start to finish. Positive takeaway, Indiana didn't quit fighting when all seemed like it was pretty much done. And I'll get into this real quick, too, in just a moment. But I guess I kind of have to get into it now to describe what I'm trying to say. But there was a moment in the fourth quarter with, I believe, about 10 and a half minutes remaining, where it was 4th and 11, and Kurt Signetti decided to punt on the next play instead of going for it on 4th and 11. And from here, before I continue further, I did pull up Kurt Signetti's response because he was asked about that decision during the post-game press conference. So before I go any further, I do want to play his response to whenever he was asked about why he decided to punt in that situation when they were down 3 scores with what seemed like not a lot of time remaining. So here's what Kurt Signetti said about that.
I didn't want to punt, but we were doing nothing on offense, and our defense was fighting. That was the only positive really that I could draw, is our defense was still fighting because offense was doing nothing. And I didn't want to go 4th and 10. It's like you're just wishing and hoping. You have nothing to base it on that you can convert 4th and 10 at that point, right? And there's still time if you punt to win the game. So that was the reason why. I didn't want to do it, but I felt like it was the best move.
I don't really disagree with anything he said there except for one thing, and that's the fact that there wasn't a lot of time left. I mean, so yeah, Indiana did make the comeback, of course, right? But all of the things that took place and some of them that didn't take place that would have been necessary for Indiana to come back would have taken a miracle. And that's why you didn't see it happen. Of course, you saw them score, get 1 2-point conversion, get an onside kick, and then score again. But on top of that, you still needed another 2-point conversion, another onside kick recovery, and then another touchdown and a 2-point conversion. It's a very, we could even call it an impossible hill to climb, because if that would had happened last night, I mean, that would have probably been one of the most insane comebacks in college football history. But then that's just a what if, right? So there's no reason in talking about it more so other than that. But the truth of the matter is, he talks about having enough time. Yeah, let's talk about him crediting the defense, right? So the defense played much better than the offense throughout most of the game, but I think the reason so many people were questioning the decision to punt there is because, yeah, the defense had done fine, but I think what a lot of people were afraid of is what ended up happening on that ensuing possession for Notre Dame, and that's they just kind of, I don't want to say they just punched you in the throat, but they had their way very methodically against Indiana at that point. They got down, they ended up scoring on that drive, and I think the result of it made it very easy to criticize, and it still should have been criticized regardless, because let's just say Notre Dame had ended up punting. Yeah, Indiana would have gotten the ball back. They would have had some more time, but you would have had, who knows how much time Notre Dame would have taken off the clock before Indiana would have gotten the ball back had they not scored on them. It just felt like with 10 and a half minutes in a game where this is it. This is the playoffs. This is not a regular season game. You lose and you go home. And I know he's aware of that. I'm not trying to make it seem like Cignetti wasn't aware of what was going on. He just laid out why he made the decision that he made. But it just, knowing Cignetti's kind of aggressive play calling style and the way that he's been all season long, I think it was just very surprising to see him not go for it in that situation, right? It was also very surprising, and I don't necessarily disagree with this call, when he decided to kick the field goal at the end of the second quarter instead of go for it on fourth down and try to get the touchdown. Part of me wishes he would have gone for it, just because, that's how Cignetti's been, like I mentioned. But the smart side of me was like, take the points, get into halftime, and try to reset things at the beginning of the third quarter. And that ended up, not really being the case. Also, for some reason, forgot to mention, this is another part of the big momentum shift in the first half. Jeremiah Love's 98-yard touchdown that followed Curtis Rourke's interception. I mean, that obviously had a lot to do with what deflated kind of Indiana's momentum because things were very balanced at that point, right? Because even though Rourke had thrown the interception, Riley Leonard had done the exact same thing the drive before. And to allow Notre Dame, I'm trying to see, it was just one play, right? Yeah, one play, 98 yards from Jeremiah Love. And it does feel like when you pin somebody back that far on their own side of the field, it feels like one of two results always happen. It's either a 3-and-out, or it's a big play for either a touchdown or like a 50-yard gain, something along those lines. Unfortunately, it was literally worst case scenario for Indiana in that situation. But like, again, also in the press conference, Cignetti mentioned like coverage was just on the wrong side for that particular play. So it still happened. It's still unfortunate the way that it played out. But I guess at this point, since I'm just kind of sitting here doing this by myself and just kind of reflecting on the game in general, I'm not going to talk big picture stuff right now. I'm going to save that for Monday's show, In Touch with Indiana Sports. Of course, if you don't check that out, it's right here on Hoosier Illustrated, Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Not this upcoming Wednesday, of course, because of Christmas, but you can check that out for all things Indiana on each of those days. And of course, now we're going to be transitioning fully into basketball season after we kind of put a bow on this historic Indiana football season. But I'll give my my big picture thoughts on everything on Monday. But just quickly again, 11-2, you make the college football playoff. I guess that's one other thing I want to hit on, right? By the way, the narrative towards the end of the game last night was, and I don't remember exactly if it stemmed from the commentators. A lot of it was online. I'll tell you what, I'm so happy that I shut my phone off. This is the first time I had done this season. I shut my phone off and did not look on Twitter for about 90% of the game. I turned my phone back on whenever the game was pretty much decided. And I didn't do a whole lot of bantering with people. I made a few posts on Twitter just because I wanted to just get it out into the ether, so to speak. But the narrative online with the ESPN folks, which, that they do what they do, right? The narrative began, did Indiana really deserve to be in the playoff? Yes, they did deserve to be in the playoff. What happens in the playoff does not have to do what got you into it, right? When you have a disappointing performance, that's just the way that it is, okay? And I'm not going to get into the whole even mentioning it is just going to make me go nuts. So I just need to avoid going down that path right now. But the example that I keep thinking about is, because nobody ever argues this, what I'm about ready to say. But in the NCAA tournament for basketball, right? You have teams that are 1 seeds, 2 seeds, 3 seeds. I mean, any team that is basically up into the 5 level that gets upset by a double-digit seed, it's usually seen as a surprise, right? It doesn't mean that team didn't deserve to be that seed or didn't deserve to be in that position in that game, or doesn't mean that their season was bad and they were a fraudulent team. None of that stuff matters, or none of that stuff is true. But for some reason in college football, because the way everything is selected is so subjective, everyone feels the need to comment like if a team doesn't play to its potential every single game, that they don't deserve to be in the spot that they were in. Indiana football absolutely deserved everything they got this season. Every win, every loss, every postseason accolade, all those things. None of that can be taken away from this Indiana football team, right? No matter how many SEC people scream and yell, especially SEC coaches. Lane Kiffin is really getting on my nerves on social media. And he's just doing what he needs to do. He's acting himself, and he's advocating, I guess, for his team in some way, even though it doesn't do him any good at this point. But I will say this, though, and this goes back to another part of the conversation that Mitchell and I had. I don't think this performance does anything good for, let's just say, the immediate future next season. If Indiana finds themselves in a similar position to get in the college football playoff next year, the one thing I think you won't see as much, and again, a lot of it depends on regular season results, right? They have I won't say much more difficult, but it's a more difficult schedule next year against, at least perceived. You never know what teams are going to end up being like. But one thing that you won't see as much, I think, next season is the benefit of the doubt for Indiana, because people are going to bring up, well, we've seen what an Indiana team will do in the playoff, right? Even though next year's team will be, I don't want to say entirely different, because you are more than likely going to have some guys stay that were important pieces. Maybe I'm wrong. And honestly, by the time this gets posted, I have not looked and to see if anybody's into the transfer portal just yet. I'll tackle that on Monday as well. But either way, I think we'll go ahead and put an end to this little post-game wrap-up show. I hope that I made a lot of sense with everything I mentioned here this morning. And, great football season. Disappointing finish. I still enjoyed taking in the game. I wish there were more moments last night that were enjoyable to take in. Obviously, I loved the early interception with Riley Leonard. I was feeling good after that, as I'm sure many of you were. But, things turned around for Notre Dame fairly quickly, and we really didn't have a lot to get excited about for Indiana until the very end of the game, when at that point, like I mentioned earlier, the mountain that they were trying to climb was an impossible task. They tried it anyway, which is admirable, but it was too little too late. But that's that. Notre Dame will move on to face Georgia. And I'll say this too. I will absolutely be rooting for Notre Dame against Georgia. I'm sure many of you will too. I don't want any SEC team to do well. I am, again, we may get into more of it on Monday, but I don't know. I don't think here my hierarchy of who I want to win is any Big Ten team that's not Ohio State, then Notre Dame, then Ohio State, and then pretty much everybody else is just kind of whatever. So that'll do it. Thank you for checking out today's Indiana football postgame wrap-up show on HoosierIllustrated.com. Like I mentioned earlier, In Touch with Indiana Sports. On Monday, Mitchell Page should be back with us to give us his thoughts on the game. He was, of course, there in person to take it all in, and we'll get his season wrap-up at the beginning of the week as well. So thanks again for listening, and have a Merry Christmas if you celebrate, Happy Hanukkah if you celebrate, whatever it may be. And until Monday, I'll talk to you next time.